Conway Hall, London, where ethics matter.
Welcome to the London Fortean Society. We have had a bit of a break. We've been doing things online, and now we're doing things with people in an audience and online. So welcome to everyone here at Conway Hall, and welcome to everyone wherever you are. Probably your bedrooms, I don't know, maybe the shed, not sure, don't like to speculate. For the people in the room, hi, if you don't mind, opposite where I'm standing is a camera. Please don't walk in front of the camera. If you need to leave your seats because the queue at the bar has probably gone down now, go through that door there or that door there. Don't go through that bit that I've just pointed at. Thank you. So, yeah, hello. Hope you're all right. Ian asked me to ramble a little bit. Is that enough rambling, do you think? So, yeah, we've been doing talks, and now we're doing them live again, and I'm not totally sure what to do, and so I'm just going to introduce our speaker. What will happen is he'll speak for about 45 minutes. We'll have a brief break. His book, for those of you in the room, is available over there from the Word Bookshop at Conway Hall. If you're online, I think the Word have got a are at the bookshop website selling event books as well, so check that out. Help out your local bookshop. Or if they're not local, help them out anyway, you know. No need to be parochial about it. And yeah, I think that's everything. I'm going to do Q&A. If you've got questions, if you're on Zoom, put them into the chat, and Mr. Atari over there will let us know what they are, and I'll keep an eye on them too. So yeah, with that, someone who knows what they're doing in front of an audience, please welcome our speaker, Ian Keable. Keable? Yeah. He's an author and historian and wizard, and he will be peppering his talk, which is about the origin of hoaxes from the 18th century, hoaxes as we know them. Obviously, people have been taking the piss out of each other for millennia, probably. From the 18th century now, so please welcome Ian Keable.
I think a very professional hand over there, Scott. Nice to see you right on the ball. Anyway, good evening to you all. I think I'm going to play the room rather than the Zoom camera. You could have bought a ticket and come down rather than sitting at home. But delightful to see everybody here. Thank you for coming along to my talk. Scott's been sent out of the room in disgrace now. So as you've heard, the subject of my talk is the century of deception, the birth of the hoax in 18th century England. And apart from writing the book and also giving talks from time to time, I'm also, as Scott hinted at, a professional magician. And what I thought I would do for purposes of this talk is to demonstrate how my sort of magic background and knowledge about magic sort of impacted on the book itself. So to begin with the concept of a hoax, I like to think that I specialize in comedy magic, although audiences often dispute that after they've seen me. But I think a good hoax has all the same attributes as a good comedy magic trick, in the sense that it should be amusing but also fooling. And when I was sort of looking through my sort of repertoire of tricks, I thought, well, I've actually got quite a few tricks which I've considered to be almost like sort of hoax-related magic tricks. So I'm going to sort of start off by warming you up with a quick hoax-related magic trick, which involves a piece of rope, which I have here, into which I'm just going to tie a little knot. And the object of the trick is very simple. The object of the trick is to make the knot disappear. But this will only actually work if you're not actually looking at the piece of rope. So, yeah, most of you are not really joining in here, are you? So I'll tell you what, I'm going to confuse you a little bit by inducing a second piece of rope. So hopefully you're going to be looking at this piece of rope rather than this piece of rope. So hopefully looking at this piece. No, once again, not really joining in. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to confuse you further by twisting the two ropes together, which of course now means you're not quite sure if you're looking at the white piece of rope or the red piece of rope. And it does enable me to make it disappear. Well, not actually disappear, but actually transfer across and join the white piece of rope. There. Thank you. Now, I'm sure some of you have thought, well, that's pretty obvious how that tricks work, and you're probably right, because the answer is I actually have a little slip knot, you see, and as I was twirling the ropes around, I was slipping the knot off the red piece of rope and putting it onto the white piece of rope. But I did mention at the beginning this was a hoax-related magic trick. So is that the true explanation? That wouldn't explain why I could now toss the knot back onto the rope. It wouldn't explain why I could show it on, and it certainly wouldn't explain why I could untie the rope and demonstrate there really was a wide piece of rope. Thank you very much. So there we are, my concept, I guess you'd call it, of a hoax-related magic trick. And I think the best magic tricks, like the best hoaxes, are actually sort of very benign, hopefully sort of amusing and fooling, as I said. But in reality, that's not true, certainly of hoaxes, and also of the occasional magic trick as well. I mean, a classic magic trick, which one or two may have seen, is a sort of the guillotine trick, where you get some, don't worry, I'm not going to be doing that. But you get some unfortunate spectator out of the audience, you put them in a sort of big guillotine, much to the amusement of most of the rest of the audience. And lots of sort of jokes involved. You bring over a bucket, and take out a mannequin's head to demonstrate that you'd done the trick before. Wrap a scarf around their neck, which is all sort of looks bloody. Ask them to hold their hands like this, so it will save time later. So all these types of gags, which are amusing for the audience, but the poor person who's actually in the guillotine probably isn't enjoying the experience at all. And if he or she, after the event, sort of laughs, I think it's more laughter of relief rather than laughter necessarily of amusement. And the same is true of hoaxes. Hoaxes on the surface do come across as being hopefully quite benign, but when you sort of dig into them a little bit more, there's a lot more underneath. So just to give in my actual book, I actually talk about 10 different hoaxes over the 18th century. So I think the most benign one, which I mention in the book, is in some ways my favorite, perhaps because of the title, which is called the Bottle Conjuror hoax, which was essentially about a man who claimed that he would climb inside a bottle, an ordinary size wine bottle, on the stage of the new theatre in the Haymarket. Unfortunately, although the audience turned up, the performer did not. Now, in normal circumstances, you would have thought the audience would have a good laugh about this, particularly as the theatre said that they would give their money back to them. But of course, this is the 18th century. So immediately what happened when they discovered they'd been hoaxed, a riot broke out. The inside of the theatre was smashed. The ticket money was stolen. People had items pickpocketed and removed, and they took the paraphernalia from the theatre and burnt it all in a huge bonfire outside the theatre. So all this happened on the night. So what started off as what appears to be quite a sort of benign hoax turns into this not quite so benign, with apparently costing at least £400 worth of damages. Actually, my favourite explanation of why the Bottle Conjuror didn't turn up for the performance was that he was having a drink in the bar before the show, and the gentleman came up and said, "What are you going to be doing this evening?" And the man said, "Well, I'm going to be jumping inside the bottle." The gentleman said, "I got a bottle here, could you demonstrate?" So the man leapt inside the bottle, and the gentleman immediately corked the bottle and walked away with it. And obviously it wasn't possible for him to be in two places at the same time, so he was unable to appear at the new theatre in the Haymarket. So as to say, what this sort of demonstrates is, and this is the most benign hoax of all of the ones, that it didn't turn out to be quite so benign. Another aspect of hoaxes, which is my sort of own definition, I think, is that I don't think a hoax should be a financial scam or a con. I do separate the two. And the same sort of distinction is done with magic tricks as well. What you saw just there was a sort of conventional magic trick, but a magical, there's also what we call sort of con tricks, if you like. And in the 18th century, the best example of a con trick, I think, was something called thimble rigging. And this involved 3 thimbles and a little pea, and the operator would place the pea under one of the thimbles. The thimbles would be mixed up, and then the spectator, or as I prefer to call him, the sucker, would have to try and guess under which thimble the pea appears. And of course, he always loses because the operator can manipulate the pea to appear under any thimble. So we had this sort of distinction between con tricks and magic tricks. And in hoaxes, I do separate what I call, as I say, a conventional hoax with a financial scam or con. And again, of the 10 hoaxes which I look at in this book, only one of them is financially motivated, which I will just touch upon in a moment. Before that, though, I thought it'd be nice to sort of demonstrate an example of a sort of con trick. I suppose the equivalent of the thimble rigging today would be the free card trick, or find the lady, where you throw the 3 cards down and you have to guess where the ace or the queen is. So I want to show you a variation on the 3-card trick. One or two of you actually already have spotted what the variation is. 4 cards, very good, yes. I'm actually going to use 3 cards. I'm going to keep 1 card as a spare. So to assist me with this, I need somebody to act as my sort of... actually, I'm going to ask you, sir. Can I ask your name? Guy, excellent, Guy. So, Guy, it's very simple. All you have to do is to tell me where is the ace. If I go like that, is the ace on the top, the bottom, or the middle? Guy. No, he's in the middle, Guy. I hadn't even done the tricky move, and you still fell for it. So don't try and be too clever, Guy. Just go with it. Okay. That's the tricky move there, Guy. So you obviously had problems before, so I'm going to give you a bit of a hint here. What do you reckon, top, bottom, or middle?
I'll go for the middle.
The middle. It's the obvious place, isn't it? Unfortunately, Guy, it's wrong. In actual fact, I was lying when I said I was only using 3 cards, you see, because the ace is actually down here on the case. So, Guy, that's £20 you owe me. Yep. I did mention the £20 bet, didn't I? I distinctly remember doing so, Guy. I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to go double or quits. You know what that means? Yes? If anybody doesn't, double or quits. If Guy wins this time, back to square one. If you lose, you owe me £40. Okay, Guy, very straightforward. So once again, in the middle. Definitely in the middle there, Guy. Watch carefully. Here comes a tricky move. That's the tricky move. What do you reckon this time, Guy? Top, bottom, middle. What do you reckon? Middle. It's the obvious place, isn't it? Unfortunately, it's wrong, Guy. In fact, I'm surprised you fell for it again. I'll be quite honest, you see, because you've got the 3 blank cards, ace down there. That's £40, Guy. £40. Not your lucky night, is it? But, Guy, I'm going to give you one final chance. Not for the money. I'll collect that later. This is for your self-respect and dignity, Guy. Is that important?
That's
Long lost, is it? Well, you won't mind then. One final time, guys. So ace, definitely in the middle. Everybody can see it. This time I don't do 1 tricky move. I actually do 1, 2, 3 tricky moves. So, Guy, for the 3rd and final time, for your self-respect and dignity, where is the ace? Is wrong, Guy. And Guy, I really want you to win that time because we've got the 3 aces here. So, thank you very much. So, what can I say? A sort of a con-type trick relating again, making the distinction between the conventional magic trick and the con trick. So, yeah, when it comes to hoaxes, there's only one hoax in my book which I think was financially motivated, which on the surface seems the most strange, because this is in some ways the most humorous of all the hoaxes, because back in 1726 a woman called Mary Toft claimed that she was giving birth to rabbits. Now her backstory was that she used to work as a hop picker in a field, and she saw a lot of rabbits hopping around. She began to have a longing for rabbits. She dreamt of rabbits. She consumed a large number of rabbits. Soon after that, she became pregnant. She had a miscarriage, but then a few weeks after that, she gave birth to her first rabbit. And this was taken by her husband, her name was Mary Toft, to a man called John Howard. And John Howard obviously was skeptical, but he agreed to come and see Mary Toft. And over the course of the next several weeks, he was there at the birth of no less than 17 rabbits. And a lot of people believed in this, a lot of eminent doctors of that period, including Nathaniel St. Andre, who was a surgeon and anatomist to George I. Quite what he was treating George I for, I'm not sure, possibly myxomatosis at the time. But anyway, this is how the story emerged about Mary Toft giving birth to rabbits. And the reason she did it was for financial reasons. She was hoping that she would become a little bit of a mini celebrity by doing this. And she would sort of exhibit herself. There were various places to exhibit yourself in 18th century London. There were sort of taverns. There was also fairs like Bartholomew Fair and Southwark Fair. And by exhibiting herself, she could perhaps make some money. I think that was the sort of idea that she had. She would be the rabbit woman. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for her, and therefore she was unable to actually make any money from it. But it sort of shows, if you like, as I say, this is the only hoax really which was financially motivated, and as you can see, a ridiculous motivation really. It was highly unlikely that she was going to succeed, even though she did fool a large number of male predominantly male, almost all male, I think, male doctors and midwives of the period. Another branch of magic which is sort of relating to hoax is that of mind reading. Mind readers are people, obviously, who suggest that they can read people's minds in some way. And I found this a sort of fascinating connection in a couple of ways to some of the hoaxes. If you're not familiar with mind reading, I'll give a very, very quick demonstration of a bit of mind reading. Perhaps I could just ask you, sir, you can stay seated as well, next to Guy. Your name is? Graham, excellent. So, Graham, what I want you to do for me, if it's possible, is to think of a significant year in your life, Graham. Could you do that? A significant year in your life. Maybe when you left school, got married, came off probation, something like that, Graham. Nothing too recent, and certainly nothing in the future. Because if I could read the future, I wouldn't be here in the first place. I'll be quite honest with you, Graham. So, as I say, what I want you to do, Graham, is to think of a significant year in your life, if you could do that for me. So, are you thinking of one? Excellent. I must confess, nothing much is coming through at the moment, Graham, I'll be honest with you. I'm thinking I'm picking up your thoughts, actually, Guy, which is slightly worrying. No, sorry, Graham, I think something is coming through now. Okay, Graham, I've committed myself. I cannot change my mind. Now, it's very important to realize for people at home and people here that nothing's been set up between the two of us, has it? No, no. No money's exchanged hands? Not yet. Not yet. No sexual favours promised. You didn't say not yet that time, did you, Graham? Yeah. So if I was to get this right, would you buy a drink? Obviously not for the people at home, but a drink for everyone. I was thinking of that, Graham. Now, for the first time, Graham, what is the year that you are thinking of?
1976.
1976. Well, I got the first two digits right, which is quite impressive. The one and the yep, you get that, yep. 1976. So can I ask what happened in 1976, Graham, if that's okay?
Yes, I left school and went to art college.
Oh, right, great. Significant year in your life, certainly. Now, I know you said 1976, but I think you were first of all thinking of 1980, is that right? You are being nice to me, aren't you, Graham? You weren't really, were you? You're just being nice.
I moved to London in 1980, and that was a very significant year.
Oh, well, I did a bit of a miracle there without realising it. Okay, I'll take credit for that. Thank you very much. I got... Not only did I get Graham's 1976, but also 1980. But 1976 was the really significant one. I'm just going to move forward, so Graham, hopefully you can read what I wrote down there. Could you shout that out nice and loud?
1976.
1976. Thank you. Yes, thank you. Yes, it's... that was meant to be an applause point, so thank you. Obviously, I hadn't tuned that up quite as much. So, so that's a very sort of basic mind-reading trick where I read not only Graham's 1980, but also 1976. Quite a remarkable feat, I think you must agree. But even though I did this sort of minor miracle, and probably you were so stunned, that's why you forgot to applaud. You still don't really believe that I could read minds. I think that's probably fair to say. And that's because I'm not presenting the persona of a mind reader. I'm doing, I did a couple of magic tricks first, which were sort of more comedic before attempting to read Graham's mind there. But if I'd come out here and presented myself very much as a mind reader, not mentioning the word magic, if I'd talked about being a profiler for the FBI, that I was a master of body language and NLP, that I was all dressed in black and looked very serious, then I think you would be more convinced by that sort of persona that I could genuinely read minds. And this is precisely what's happening with some of these hoaxes. The hoaxes get away with it because they present themselves as being capable or like what they're pretending to be. And there's a wonderful example, again in my book, which is a man called George Psalmanazar. And George Psalmanazar claimed, although he was actually from a lowly French peasantry family, that he actually lived and came from a place called Formosa, which back in the 18th century was, it was called Formosa back in the 18th century, it's now Taiwan. So Formosa or Taiwan, even though he'd never been anywhere near Formosa / Taiwan. But he got away with it. And the reason he got away with it is he presented himself very much as somebody who could come from Formosa. Remember, people didn't know much about the island at that time. For instance, he made up his own language. He said that they worshipped a sun god, and every day at midday he used to sort of worship the sun god. And he used to go around consuming raw meat as well, which was, really throwing himself into the role of a Formosan. He eventually arrived in London, and he was accepted as a Formosan partly because he claimed that he converted to the Anglican faith. And again, he presented very well in this because he was a very upright young man. He didn't seem to have any particular faults. He wasn't a sort of womanizer. He wasn't drinking. He wasn't trying to exploit his fame. And I think what this did is that people sort of invested in him. They said, here's a man who could clearly have converted from a heathen race. And so everything about him is presenting himself as somebody from Formosa, and therefore that's why he was partly so convincing. He was also a great debater, actually. Edmund Halley, who would later become the royal astronomer, tried to catch him out. He said, on Formosa, at what angle would the sun hit the hearth when it comes down the chimney? George said, I've got no idea. At which point Edmund Halley said, well, it's over the Tropic of Cancer. It comes directly down the chimney into the hearth. And George said, well, that's very interesting, but in Formosa we have crooked chimneys. So that essentially dealt with that problem. So what I'm basically saying here is if you, in order to get away with some hoaxes, you've got to present yourself as the person you are pretending to be. And George Psalmanazar did that absolutely brilliantly. There's another more subtle technique as well that the mind readers use, which was also incorporated by a hoaxer of the 18th century. What mind readers tend to do is they don't normally come out and say, I'm going to read your mind. They sort of tend to work up slowly. So they might start off by saying, look, I want you to hold a coin in either hand, and I will try to guess in which hand the coin is in. And then they talk about using tells or the phrasing of the word in order to convince you that they can tell which hand the coin is in. And then they might go on to something like a lie detector, trying to tell whether you're telling the truth or the lie, again, which sounds all very convincing. In actual fact, when it comes to telling whether people are telling the truth or lie, it's absolutely impossible to do that. I think it's no longer a lie detector is allowed to be used, certainly in this country, and I don't think in America either. And often when you get somebody on the witness stand, it is really impossible to tell at the end of the day, are they telling the truth or are they lying? And there's a great example of this, again, from my book, a woman called Elizabeth Canning. And Elizabeth Canning was kidnapped supposedly by a gypsy called Mary Squires. And she was held for 28 days, and then she managed to escape. And Mary Squires was eventually prosecuted, actually ironically not for kidnapping, but for cutting off the stays of Elizabeth Canning, because back then it was easier to prosecute people for destruction of property than it was of kidnapping. Anyway, Mary Squires was prosecuted, she was found guilty, and because it was an offence of grand larceny, back then that was a capital offence, and Mary Squires was going to be hanged. Now, the case began to unravel when witnesses appeared and stated, well, Mary Squires couldn't have kidnapped Elizabeth Canning, who apparently was held in a house in Enfield Wash, because at the time she'd been in Abbotsbury in Dorset. So you had half people coming forward and saying Mary Squires was definitely in Dorset, and the other half saying, no, she was at Enfield Wash. Interestingly, Mary Squires wasn't the most attractive of women. She was quite an elderly woman. There was a lot of anti-gypsy feeling around at the time. And there was a print produced of her as a witch where she was riding on a broomstick, and the speech bubble came out saying, well, I can be in Abbotsbury and Enfield Wash both at the same time, which is a nice play on the sort of belief in witchcraft back then. Anyway, eventually Elizabeth Canning was put on trial for perjury, and again, witnesses were coming forth saying Mary Squires was in Enfield Wash, Mary Squires was in Abbotsbury and Dorset. As for Elizabeth Canning, she said, I was definitely in Enfield Wash, definitely kidnapped by Mary Squires. But even to this day, we're not 100% sure who was telling the truth. In actual fact, Elizabeth Canning was found guilty of perjury, and her sentence was transported to America for 7 years. But as I say, even today, we're not 100% sure whether she was telling the truth. And I think if Elizabeth Canning went on trial today, I still don't think we would know whether she was telling the truth or a lie. Maybe CCTV footage or DNA would help us out. But leaving that aside, I really don't think we could tell. So a bit of a digression there to indicate that it really is very, very hard to tell whether somebody is telling the truth or the lie. But for the mind reader, having sort of established the small lie, if you like, moving on to the slightly bigger lie, he can then, or she can then start sort of reading minds and doing what are perceived to be miracles. But I think if the mind reader comes in straight away and does the miracles and doesn't do the gradual build-up, he or she is less likely to be believed. And this was true of a brilliant hoax by a man called William Henry Ireland. And William Henry Ireland discovered a new Shakespeare play called Vortigern, an entirely new Shakespeare play, and it was actually staged for one night on the 2nd of April 1796. Now, of course, if William Henry Ireland had come along and said, I've discovered a new play by Shakespeare, nobody would have believed him. They said, this is quite ridiculous. How could you have, brought this up from complete nowhere? He was very cunning, though. What he did was he started very small. He started off, actually, by finding a bill of exchange that had been signed by Shakespeare, a very boring piece of Shakespearean ephemera. And, of course, the thinking back then was there was no way anybody would bother to forge such a boring document. Who's interested in a bill of exchange? So he sort of began to sort of suck people in that way. Next, he found a few letters that had been written to various actors about actors' pay. He then came up with a profession of faith. He then found a slightly different version of King Lear. He then found a new act from Hamlet. And eventually, at the end of the day, he produced this entirely new play of Vortigern. And it's the way that he subtly crept in, because if you believe the beginning, if you believe that the bill of exchange is true, then you start believing all the rest as it sort of goes up and up and up. And that's what William Henry Ireland did so successfully. So again, it sort of hangs up with... Did he forge everything? Yes, he forged everything. He did. Yes. Spoiler alert there. Yes, he did. Yes, none of it. So if you didn't catch that at home, he was asked if he forged everything. He did forge everything, but he was using genuine parchment and paper of the 16th century. So he was a very good forger, if you like. When I came again to write the book, I was interested in two aspects of hoaxes in particular, I think, which I have touched upon. One is the motivation of the hoaxer, and the other is how they got away with the hoax. And I think it's fair to say that, well, I like to think that I know why all of them got away with their various hoaxes. And basically it comes down to using the same reasons that we fall for hoaxes today. But when it comes to the motivation of the hoax, so I really can't use my skills as a magician to be able to determine the motivation of a lot of hoaxes. I mean, I do my magic, partly for money, obviously, but also hopefully to entertain people. What I don't do is I don't do my magic in order to exact revenge, in order for jealousy, because I've got parental issues, because I've got delusion of grandeur, which are all the sort of reasons that hoaxers come up with, or one would analyze the reasons why they come up with a hoax in the first place. So it is a fascinating area, that motivation of why people do hoaxes. And just to reiterate, very, very rarely is it for financial reasons at the end of the day. I just sort of going to end, I think, with one hoaxer in particular who is most like a magician. She wasn't a magician, but she could well have been. In fact, she's probably better than one or two of the magicians that I know, my colleagues and friends. And this case actually took place in 1772, where an elderly woman called Mrs. Golding woke up one morning to discover that various items in her house were sort of crashing to the floor, sort of cutlery, porcelain, dishes. It got more dramatic than that. Furniture started toppling over. Cups literally flew across the room. Water started boiling, cold water started boiling of its own accord, and sort of strings of meat suddenly dropped off their hooks without any apparent reason. Mrs. Golding was obviously very concerned by this, and her neighbours came around and they thought there might be some sort of structural problem with the property, so they moved everything out and she moved into a neighbour's house. But as soon as she moved into the neighbour's house, the same items happened again. More cutlery and porcelain and breakages took place. Her niece then took her, moved into her niece's house. Again, exactly the same thing happened. Eventually, she moved back into her own house, where it started recurring again. At that point, she sent off her maid, who had accompanied her on the trip everywhere, to do an errand. And surprise, surprise, everything ceased at that point. And when the maid returned, the maid was handed in her notice, and never again did these strange activities take place. Now, from that, you think there's a pretty good link between the happenings that took place and the presence or the non-presence of the maid. The maid's name, by the way, was Anne Robinson. However, a little pamphlet, yes, no relation, I don't think, to the quiz master. So this, there was actually a little pamphlet written about it a few days after called The Astonishing Transactions at Stockwell, which is all where it happened. And this was written up based on 8 or 9 witnesses who had seen all these occurrences take place, the neighbours and friends of Mrs. Golding and Mrs. Golding herself. And in it, they described all the events that took place, but none of them actually said that Anne Robinson had been involved. They didn't sort of finger Anne Robinson, so to speak. They admitted that she was there, but they couldn't explain why it had all happened. Now, if we look at this event from a sort of modern day eyes, we would perceive this as being a poltergeist. It's a classic example of the poltergeist, of objects flying around the room, normally in the presence tends to be in the presence of teenage girls. And this would seem to be a great example of it. The word poltergeist doesn't actually come into being until the mid-19th century. A woman called Catherine Crowe wrote the Night Side of Nature, and I think she popularized the word poltergeist as far as English language was concerned. There's a man called Harry Price, who was a great paranormal investigator of the 20th century, and he wrote a book called Poltergeist over England. So poltergeist is a very sort of a term which we're all sort of familiar with these days. But back in the 18th century, they weren't. So they didn't use the term poltergeist to explain it. They had to come up with sort of other reasons why, more sort of supernatural. And one of those was actually witchcraft, because, of course, a lot of people did believe in witchcraft in the 18th century. The Methodists, John Wesley was a great believer in witchcraft. He actually, one of his famous quotes was, "If I give up witchcraft, I have to give up the Bible." So that was how convinced he was about witchcraft back then. So there were suggestions that maybe this was to do with witchcraft. But so that's the case as it was back in the 18th century. But what's fascinating about this is that quite a few years later, Anne Robinson actually confessed that she was, surprise, surprise, the woman who'd perpetrated all these strange happenings. And she gives the explanation, and her behaviour is just almost like a professional magician. To begin with, she's working with fairly elderly people. Most of Mrs. Golding, friends and neighbours, were fairly elderly, and therefore their eyesight and their concentration wasn't that great. So sort of as soon as they turned their back, she would sort of throw something across the room. So they were convinced that this object flew. And also they were scared of what's going to happen, so they were deliberately averting their eyes anyway. She obviously worked very fast because she was young and nimble. She used various techniques. One of them was that she had some little sort of powder that would make water boil, so that was the way she made the water boil. The strings of ham that were hung up, what she would do is loosen them so that after a period of time they would suddenly drop down. So she was coming up with these almost like sort of magical techniques, if you like, to fool all these rather elderly, gullible people. But she also brilliantly analysed it, because she said that what they did afterwards was they exaggerated what they saw. And this is a technique which we magicians use a lot, because our audience members tend to exaggerate what they remember and recall. There's a couple of reasons for this. The first one is a memory problem. We all have a memory problem. We have a selective memory. So we remember the thing the magician wants to remember, perhaps, and forget the bit which we don't want them to remember. And there are various sort of techniques which we can use to do that. But what that basically does is means you remember the amazing magic as opposed to perhaps something that caused the amazing magic to happen. And that's precisely what had happened here. But the second thing is even more subtle. As an audience, we tend to exaggerate what we see in order to impress our friends when we tell them about the trick later. Because if you go up and I saw this amazing magician, he produced a playing card out of his wallet, the person you're telling that to is probably going to say, well, didn't he just put it there when you weren't looking? And you're going to, I don't think so. But that doesn't sound very convincing. So what you try to do, you sort of exaggerate what you saw. You say, well, he produced, I was holding onto the wallet all the time and the card still appeared in the wallet. So people exaggerate what they see, which is great for us as magicians, although it can be a bit alarming when somebody comes up and says, can you do that amazing trick where, and they describe something which is absolutely impossible because that's what they recall. But that is human nature. And that was absolutely what was happening here because all these witnesses to these events were obviously outdoing themselves in describing what they saw. So they talk literally about cutlery dancing along the floor and leaping out of the air. Eggs flew across the room. So they're really exaggerating the circumstances in an absolutely brilliant way. And I just think it's a wonderful demonstration, if you like, of Anne Robinson using magical skills in order to fool all these people. The wonderful Stockwell ghost that took place in 1772. But there's still some people who are convinced it is a poltergeist, by the way. That I saw an online site not recently, not so long ago, where somebody was saying the Stockwell ghost is a wonderful example of a poltergeist in action. Obviously, it's hard for me to demonstrate here the exaggeration of how you're going to describe my tricks when you go back home and tell your friends and family. But I might be able to demonstrate sometimes our inability to remember things. So I'm wondering, sir, would you like to accompany or help me out here? I'm actually going to ask you to take a seat here. Is that all right? That'd be great. Your name is? Sorry? Alex, have a seat here, have a seat. I don't think, does he need a microphone? No, he doesn't need a microphone. No, I'll translate for Alex, but I'm sure. Alex, you have to project yourself. Okay. Oh, there we are. So, Alex, this is a card trick, as you've probably guessed, as I have here a pack of cards. And what I'm going to do, Alex, is to ask you in a moment to select a card. It's going to be a very fair choice, Alex. I'm not going to try to influence your choice in any way whatsoever. No, I'm going to give you a fair choice, Alex. What I'm going to do, actually, is I'm just going to run my thumb down the side of the pack like this. I just want you to call out stop wherever you like as I just go down the pack like that. Stop. Excellent, okay. So that's the place you stopped me at. Could you take the card which you stopped at? Have a look at it, Alex. Keep it yourself. Don't show the camera. That's important. Don't show the audience. Just keep it yourself. And so have you got the card in mind, Alex? Yep. So that's the easy bit. The harder bit, Alex, is to remember the card, okay? So a lot of pressure here on you, all right? Okay, you think you'll be able to do that? Excellent, okay. I'm just going to come forward if you'd just like to place the card back there for me. Excellent. Thanks, Alex. There it is. So Alex's card is lost somewhere in the pack. I'm going to give the pack a quick little shuffle. Thank you. They're applauding at home, if nothing else, and a couple of cuts as well. Now, Alex, what I'm going to do at this point is I'm deliberately going to move in front of you so you won't actually be able to see the card for the moment, okay? And what's going to happen is the card is going to leap out of the pack. It's going to make 4 revolutions in the air. It might be 3, it might be 5, okay? Don't hold it to me. Hopefully I'll catch the card. That's certainly not guaranteed. And hopefully it'll be your card, Alex. So that's the trick. So as I say, I'm going to deliberately come in front of Alex so he can't see the card. And I think you'll find that was 4 revolutions. Thank you. Alex, I have a card here. It is, in fact, a red card. Was your card a red card, Alex?
It was.
It was a red card. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Show the camera there. It was also a heart. Is that correct, Alice? It was a heart. 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 It was quite a high heart, wasn't it, Alex? It was. It was quite a high heart. It was quite a high heart. It was quite a high heart. So for the first time, Alex, can you tell us the name of your card?
The Jack of Hearts.
The Jack of Hearts. You see, this is a great demonstration of somebody's memory being rather poor. I said I would prove it, and I have indeed done so. The Jack, you're quite sure of that, Alex, are you?
I am.
You're now questioning yourself, aren't you? Yes. Is that it?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Oh. Alex, thank you very much indeed for your assistance. Big round of applause to Alex as he... So there we are, a combination of a hoax-related magic trick and poor memory by Alex, although it wasn't, in fact, poor memory at all, was it? Well, thank you very much. I think that just about sort of concludes my talk. I'll finish maybe with one final... Actually, I'll do it at the end. Why not? I'll take the questions, because that will make people stay on, won't it? What's that?
Are you going to disappear in a puff of smoke?
No. But thanks for the... for the impromptu, yes. I'll finish off with a final trick, maybe right at the end after the question and answers, if that's okay. So, thank you very much.